Have you ever heard of a man whose lies echoed across continents, whose prayers masked poison, and whose loyalty was never what it seemed? In the flickering candlelight of Europe's blood-stained 17th century, where kingdoms were crumbling and new empires rising from their ashes, one man stood at the crossroads of faith, espionage, and betrayal. He wore the black robes of the Jesuit order, a symbol of piety, discipline, and unflinching loyalty to the church. But beneath those robes was a dagger. His name was Antonio de Borja. At least that's the name history remembered. But Antonio had many names, many faces, and many masters. He was born in the Spanish Empire, a scion of a declining noble house, raised among whispers of past glory and future salvation. The Borjas had long been tied to the Vatican, with bloodlines that once touched papal thrones. But Antonio was no saint, not even close. He entered the Society of Jesus at 19, already fluent in Latin, Arabic, and French. By 22, he was in Rome, preaching obedience. And by 23, he vanished. No farewell, no assignment, just silence. The Jesuits said he'd been sent east, to Jerusalem. But the truth is far more sinister. In the vaults of the Austrian Habsburg Palace, a set of letters was discovered in 1894, written in a coded cipher that took scholars decades to unravel. They speak of a man embedded deep within the Ottoman court, a man who translated sermons by day and sabotaged treaties by night, a man who dined with sultans but sent messages to the Pope, messages laced with death. In Constantinople, he was known as Kemal the Scholar. In Paris, Le Père Noir. And to the Russians, he was simply the ghost. But how did one man, cloaked in the authority of the church, come to betray three of the world's most powerful empires? The story begins not in a palace or cathedral, but in the dirt-stained alleyways of Vienna in the winter of 1634. The Holy Roman Empire was on the verge of collapse, its cities ravaged by the 30 Years' War. And in the shadow of every church, rumors spread like fire. A Jesuit had defected, not to Protestantism but to Islam. Antonio, now calling himself Kemal, had joined a diplomatic envoy to the Ottoman capital. At first, he posed as a translator, aiding negotiations between the Habsburgs and the Sublime Porte. But behind closed doors, he was feeding Ottoman generals the weaknesses of Habsburg defenses. And yet, just as quickly, he turned around and informed the Jesuits of Turkish troop movements. He wasn't loyal to either side. He was something far more dangerous. He was loyal only to the balance of power, to keep Christendom from falling, but never strong enough to rise, to keep the Ottomans advancing, but always distracted, to keep the Tsardom of Russia watching, but never marching. Antonio believed in control, and he believed only he could maintain it. In 1640, the Ottoman Sultan Murad IV entrusted Kemal with a secret, a planned invasion of the Crimean Peninsula to challenge Russian influence. Within a week, the Russians were prepared, having intercepted the entire plan. How? A Jesuit courier had died in Warsaw. Inside his robe was sewn a page, covered in strange markings. It matched a code only a handful of church operatives knew. But it didn't go unnoticed. The Ottomans began to suspect a leak, and they began to suspect Kemal. But Antonio had a plan. He confessed. Yes, he admitted he had been corresponding with Rome, but only, he said, to ensure the survival of Christian enclaves in the East. He wept, he fasted, he prayed, and Murad forgave him. But Murad made one final mistake. He let Antonio live. By 1647, Antonio was in Paris, under yet another name, Frere Alaric. He was now whispering in the ears of French cardinals, suggesting policies that would prolong the war in the German states, and advising Louis XIII on matters of Ottoman diplomacy. 3 years later, when Ottoman emissaries arrived in Paris to sign a trade pact, the French already knew every clause. Antonio had sent the documents, weeks before they arrived, hidden in the spines of hollowed-out Jesuit missiles. He wasn't just a double agent. He was a triple agent, and perhaps even more, because what Antonio did next changed everything. He turned on the Jesuits. Somewhere in the Balkans, in the dead of night, a convent burned. Inside were 3 Jesuit priests, executed, their tongues cut out, their hands branded with a mark that looked like a cross, with 3 points. A letter found on one of the corpses bore a single sentence: "Let no one hold the leash who is not also the beast." From that point on, Antonio vanished from every record. No more letters, no more sightings. It was as if the earth itself swallowed him whole. But the damage was done. 3 empires, 3 betrayals, each one executed so cleanly, so delicately, that none could prove it had been him. And yet, all suspected. Some say he died in Moscow, executed by the Tsar's men. Others say he lived out his final years in the libraries of Cairo, rewriting history under a false name. A few, very few, believe he was never one man, but a web of agents using the same identity. But here's the part they don't want you to know. In 1993, during renovations of a Jesuit crypt in Salamanca, Spain, a skeleton was uncovered behind a false wall. In its hand was a metal medallion, etched with the same 3-pointed cross. The skull had a bullet hole, execution style, and next to it, a parchment barely legible but still intact. It read, "Empires rot from within, not without." I simply gave them the match. Whoever he was, Antonio de Borja or Kemal or Frere Alaric, was no mere traitor. He was an architect of collapse, prophet of chaos, and the world, unknowingly, still echoes with the tremors of his betrayal. So the next time you read about a war that made no sense, a treaty that collapsed overnight, or an empire that rotted mysteriously from the core, ask yourself this: was it really just politics? Or was there a ghost?